name is Tyler Bieber, and of course I am the host for the CFL segment here on Rouge Radio, a division of SportsEh Media. So, the 2013 Canadian Football League season sadly has come to an end. We talked about the Grey Cup last week, the Saskatchewan Roughriders defeating the Hamilton Tiger Cats 45-23, but there's some good news too. The hits will keep coming here on Rouge Radio throughout the entire off-season, and I guarantee you're not going to find this kind of coverage every week, this kind of dedication to Canadian football anywhere else. So please do join us each week as we break down the happenings in both the Canadian Football League and the CIS with the guys from SportsEh. You'll hear them up after me here. Our CFL segment, always interactive, and if you want to join in and share some of your thoughts, feel free to do so. You can call us up a few different ways here. There's Skype. Our username there is rouge.radio. You can call in. That number there is 1-347-989-1127. If neither of those options work for you, I believe there's something called Google Talk that lets you call any number in North America for free. So you can use that as well. If you email our producer, Jason, rougeradio@shaw.ca, you can let him know that you want to go on the show, and we'll call you back. Hit us up on Twitter, @Rouge Radio. You can find me at CFL Daily. Facebook, there's so many ways nowadays to find whatever you need on the internet, whatever kind of social media tool you use. So please, feel free, hop along. Let's hear your thoughts on the Ottawa Redblacks. A segue into my next topic here, the Ottawa Redblacks. Tonight, on this episode of Rouge Radio, we're going heavy on the Ottawa Redblacks. The CFL expansion draft is on Monday, December 16th. We're going to call this, coming up here in a little bit, the REDBLACKS SPECTACULAR. Who may be available for them to draft? Who might teams protect from being claimed by the Ottawa Redblacks? And a few other things. But before we dive into that, we're going to take care of some other big news in the CFL. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers have settled on their head coach for the 2014 season. We saw the Edmonton Eskimos hire Toronto Argonauts defensive coordinator Chris Jones not too long ago, and now the Argos have lost another coach, as the Winnipeg Blue Bombers hired special teams coordinator Mike O'Shea to be their next head coach. O'Shea played 16 seasons in the Canadian Football League for the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Toronto Argonauts. He's a 4-time Grey Cup champion. He won 3 times as a player, back-to-back in 96 and 97 with the Argonauts, once again in 2004. And then, of course, as a coach in 2012, all with the Toronto Argonauts. Blue Bombers general manager Kyle Walters on Mike O'Shea says, quote, "Mike knows what it takes to win in this league, and he has done that as both a player and a coach. He is highly respected by his peers and someone we feel is the right fit for what we are trying to build here." And I was able to listen to the introductory press conference, and I wrote down a few notes, some quotes that I found interesting. We'll share them with you here if you didn't have a chance to check it out. In terms of assistant coaches, obviously a head coach controls the sideline, but he has to have those assistants in place to help him out. O'Shea says that he has the guys he wants in mind, but of course there's a process, such as asking teams for permission to speak with guys under contract, things like that. Experience, and this is what interested me, experience isn't a huge thing for Mike O'Shea. He wants guys who are the best teachers, guys who know football and can apply it to a winning roster. Experience doesn't matter. So you could be a defensive backs coach. He may want you as his defensive coordinator, something like that. We've seen Corey Chamblin, head coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He did that. He went from being a defensive backs coach in Calgary to being the defensive coordinator. 1 year later, he was the head coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. We've seen young coordinators make the move. Maybe not in 1 year. Scott Milanovic has made the leap to head coach in Montreal. Dave Dickinson, although he's not a head coach yet, is primed to be one coming up here in the next couple of years. Other things, O'Shea said that he will bring what he knows about winning football to help change the culture in Winnipeg from a team that has missed the playoffs in back-to-back seasons to one similar that made the Grey Cup in 2011 and has success in previous years. The team will be disciplined, hardworking, and prepared. O'Shea also said that the team will win games via their defense and special teams, and he termed it as old-fashioned football. And, that kind of fits right in where the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are at. And when you think about what the Winnipeg Blue Bombers did successfully last season, at least in my mind anyways, you look at their defense, their special teams. They made some critical plays to win the 3 football games that they did. They weren't exactly an offensive team. They struggled for the most part of the season. Gary Carlton was fired as the offensive coordinator. Marcel Belfait came in to replace him. But Mike O'Shea, it's obviously not surprising. He was a special teams coordinator with the Toronto Argonauts. He played 16 seasons on the defensive side of the football. So why would you be surprised that a guy like that wants to win football games on defense and special teams? It's the easiest quick fix to get a winning roster with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers because they have that sustained pieces. They have some key pieces on defense there that they can build around. So again, he was talking about special teams. If you want to make the team, you do it on special teams. And time again throughout the press conference, he was bringing it up. And one of his final thoughts was about his former coach, Don Matthews. And a quote that he said, "Running down the field with Don Matthews watching you gave you that extra spark." And that's kind of the back to the leadership thing about Mike O'Shea, and that's what you think about him as. And for me, the most intriguing part about the Mike O'Shea hire is what he's going to do with the offense. He didn't admit it himself, of course, but I do think they need some veteran experience in play calling for an offensive coordinator. A guy who knows what he is doing with minimal input from the head coach, a guy you can trust to run the offense and have the most success in doing so. And it's a little bit different if you're hiring an offensive coach. If for some reason Dave Dickenson didn't want to be with the Calgary Stampeders anymore and took a job with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as the head coach, then I think you shift to the other side and maybe you need a bit of a more veteran defensive play caller. But with Mike O'Shea, I think you look for somebody who can step in and give their input as an offensive guy. I don't know who that may be. There's been talk of that it could be Kahari Jones, which of course wouldn't make him exactly a veteran play caller. He has done it before with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. There's talk about George Cortez. Maybe he's going to be leaving the Saskatchewan Roughriders. There's several options there. And just incredibly interested to see what Mike O'Shea does with that offense. Overall, I think it's a good one for the Bombers. We talked about it before. The culture is changing with head coaches and teams seem to be going young. O'Shea fits the bill for that. But I think even greater than that is you're talking about a guy who is one of the all-time greatest leaders in Canadian football history. Players looked to Mike O'Shea for help when he was on the field, and his ability to instill football into these players for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers is going to be extremely beneficial for that football club. And, of course, results do matter at the end of the day, and we're not going to know anything until July in terms of that. But I think if you're a fan of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers for the first time since probably the Grey Cup, you have got to be excited about what is going on with the football organization. So moving on from that, the CFL announced the 2013 All-Star team, and leading the way was a little bit of controversy, as generally is the case in Rider Nation when a player gets snubbed. Toronto Argonauts quarterback Ricky Ray was the All-Star quarterback. He beat out Rough Riders quarterback Darian Durant and CFLPA All-Star Henry Burris. As I mentioned, Durant didn't get it, so it came with a little bit of a fallout from the Saskatchewan Rough Rider faithful. And let's be real here. You have the Grey Cup. Who cares? Let it go. I'm sure Darian Durant isn't sitting at home right now and thinking, damn, I wish I was an All-Star. He's probably laughing right now because he has a Grey Cup ring. He beat Henry Burris in the Grey Cup. Ricky Ray, while he was the Grey Cup champion a year ago, is no longer the reigning Grey Cup champion. He's not Cup quarterback right now. That's Darian Durant, and I think he will be perfectly fine with that over an All-Star nod. And even at that, I think the most interesting part was that Henry Burris was the CFLPA All-Star, and that's the All-Star team that the players vote on. So your peers voted for Henry Burris too, and not Darian Durant. So that's interesting as well. Other members of the All-Star team, there was 3 unanimous selections. running back John Cornish with the Calgary Stampeders, receiver S.J. Green with the Montreal Alouettes, and defensive end Charleston Hughes also with the Stampeders. Corey Sheets was the other running back on the All-Star team. Didn't get a unanimous decision. Not sure who would have been voted. Perhaps Andrew Harris. He had a nice season with the BC Lions. Maybe even C.J. Gable. Who knows? But those three were the only unanimous selections. Other receivers were Fred Stamps, Marquay McDaniel, and Weston Dressler with the Eskimos, Stampeders, and Riders, respectively. Along the offensive line was the two nominees, two finalists for outstanding linemen. That's Jeff Keeping of the Toronto Argonauts as the center, and the winner, Brendan Labatt, as guard. Chris Van Zyl of the Argos was the other guard, and the tackles were Jovan Olafioye of the BC Lions and Stanley Bryant of the Calgary Stampeders. Joining Charleston Hughes on the defensive line was Alex Hall of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He, of course, had most of his successful play this season with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Inside, Khalif Mitchell of the Argos and Almondo Sewell of the Edmonton Eskimos. Linebackers were Chip Cox, Adam Bighill, and Enoch Mwamba of the Alouettes, Lions, and Blue Bombers. Secondary, you had Jeff Tisdale and Patrick Watkins on the corner. Halfbacks were Gerald Brown and Ryan Phillips, and the safety looking over the entire defense, Tyrone Brackenridge of the Riders. Special teams was a clean sweep by the Calgary Stampeders. Rene Paredes, Rob Maver, Larry Taylor were the place kicker, punter, and special teams player. Number of all-star nods. Chip Cox and Fred Stamps, it was their fourth time. Jovan Olafioye and Ryan Phillips, it was their third. And receiving their nod were Adam Bighill, John Cornish, Weston Dressler, Brendan Labatt, Rob Maver, Khalif Mitchell, Rene Paredes, Ricky Ray, Larry Taylor, Patrick Watkins, and Charleston Hughes. You notice there was no Hamilton Tiger Cats in that list. And if you are big into the Twitter world and you happen to go to @TiCats, check out the little beef that they had with the Toronto Argonauts. It's quite entertaining. Speaking of Ontario, though, as mentioned, we have the Ottawa Redblacks coming back in the league here. Let's get into it here. So in case you don't recall the rules of the draft, here we go. There's going to be 3 rounds. The Redblacks will select one player from each team every round. The first round will be the import draft. They will pick one import player from each of the 8 CFL rosters. Those teams get to protect one quarterback and 10 additional import players. Second round, non-import draft. At the start, you get to protect 6 non-import players. And you get carried over with that quarterback. The quarterback that you protect is protected throughout the entire draft. You also get to protect a kicker or a punter. And if you lose a quarterback in the first round, you get an additional 2 non-import selections to protect in the second round. Okay? So if Ottawa selected, say, Thomas DeMarco of the BC Lions would get 8 Canadian players to protect in the second round instead of 6. And then the third round, also a non-import round. Once again, they will select one player from each of the 8 teams. Again, those 8 teams get to protect 6 players. And this time, if a kicker or a punter was selected in the second round, that team gets to protect 2 more. So if the Ottawa Redblacks chose to take Rob Maver of the Calgary Stampeders, for instance, then the Stampeders would get 2 extra selections to protect players in the non-import draft. And this is where it gets interesting. And here's why. In February, we have the free agents. Now, Ottawa will select a free agent player, but that doesn't guarantee them that player. What would happen is if Ottawa selected, we're going to throw this out there, Shea Emery, linebacker of the Montreal Alouettes, he's a free agent. If the Alouettes did not protect him, Ottawa could select him. But what they would get would be his rights. They wouldn't have him on their team immediately. They would still have to sign him. They would have exclusive rights to do so until the CFL free agency period opens up on February 15th. So if you select a guy who's a free agent and you're Ottawa, you're not guaranteed to get him. So it's a little bit tricky and a little bit intriguing for these teams because you may not want to protect any of your free agents, being with your football team so much that they're going to come back on February 15th when the free agency period opens and Ottawa can't sign them outright anymore. You get back into the play. Or do you protect one of those free agents? And if you protect a free agent as a CFL, one of the other 8 CFL teams, again, you get to negotiate with that player, obviously. It would be the same thing if Ottawa wasn't around. You would have up until the 15th to negotiate with your player. After that point, you would become a free agent. Now, when you look at the 8 teams, and I did this earlier, it is tough. It is very tough to select 10 players for the import draft that you would want to protect. And we're going to run through it a little bit here. We're going to start with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Now, the players that I chose to keep for them were defensive back Dwight Anderson, safety Tyrone Brackenridge, linebacker Weldon Brown, defensive end John Chick, left tackle Xavier Fulton, defensive back Tristan Jackson, linebacker Brian Peters, defensive back Carlos Thomas, defensive back Rod Williams, and defensive back Prince Miller. Quarterback, of course, nobody's going to argue, protecting Darian Durant. And again, here's where it's interesting. Look who's a free agent for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Weston Dressler, Corey Sheets, Alex Hall. You're letting these guys have a chance to be claimed by the Ottawa Redblacks. Now, Corey Sheets, the Saskatchewan Roughriders had a media availability due to the All-Star selections. Corey Sheets was asked what would happen if he was selected by Ottawa, and he simply said that he wouldn't pick up the phone. He would not want to play anywhere other than the Saskatchewan Roughriders unless it was an NFL destination. And that just goes back to what we were just talking about. A lot of these guys who are free agents, if you're a team, you probably don't look at protecting them just because you know that they're going to come back to you. And it's tough to get into the non-imports just because of the extra rules. I mean, we can get into the first round a little bit here, but after that, unless you do an actual mock draft here with the Ottawa Redblacks, it's tough to protect guys because you get 6 at the outstart, but then if somebody takes a quarterback, you get 8. And, going forward, if they take a kicker punter, the rules with that. So we're just going to move along keep going on the import draft here. For the BC Lions, quarterback, of course, again, pretty obvious in my mind, Travis Lulay. The 10 import players I would choose to protect would be Ryan Phillips, Corey Banks, Cord Parks, Dante Marsh, all defensive backs for the BC Lions. Linebacker Adam Bagel, also a linebacker Solomon Elamimian. Tackle Jovan Olafioye. Receivers Emmanuel Arsenault and Courtney Taylor. And then the 10th one was a little bit tough for me because they have some very talented players that are going to be left out. But I went with defensive end Brandon Jordan. And that would leave a guy like left tackle Ben Archibald up for grabs for Ottawa. Now he's 35, but still a pretty good start if you want to develop a young kid who's not quite ready to fill in, if you're the Ottawa Redblacks. The Edmonton Eskimos are up next here, and this one I think I had the easiest time with, not just because, the Edmonton Eskimos and they had 4 wins last season. They have a very talented roster, but these 10 guys, they contribute so well that it's really a no-brainer to protect them. And those 10 guys I had were Adarius Bowman, receiver, linebacker Rene Curran and TJ Hill, another receiver Marcus Henry, defensive end Marcus Howard, quarterback, of course, Mike Riley, Eric Samuels, another defensive back, Armando Sewell, the all-star defensive tackle, linebacker J.C. Sherritt, receiver Fred Stamps, and defensive back Chris Thompson were my 10 guys plus the quarterback, Mike Riley. And that leaves guys like Odell Willis, who had a very nice bounce-back season with the Edmonton Eskimos. You know, he didn't have a terrible season with the Saskatchewan in 2012, but I thought he bounced back very nicely with the Edmonton Eskimos, like the Odell Willis of old with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Calgary Stampeders, again, interesting. And this is the biggest reason for the Calgary Stampeders. We talked about it with the Riders. They have dressed their sheets. Look at the Calgary Stampeders free agent list. Are you kidding me? This is not set up well for the Calgary Stampeders. It's a bad time for this. And granted, they very well may get most of these guys back, but listen to this. DeMonte Bolden, Darius Brooks, Johnny Forzani, Malik Jackson, Cordero Law, not too far behind Charleston Hughes in sacks this season, was Cordero Law. Price, the outstanding receiver for the Stampeders. Chris Randall, who contributed very well as a defensive back. Jawan, the outstanding offensive lineman, Dimitri Sumpas, and Jamar Wall. That is crazy. And you factor that in. Here, I didn't protect any of the free agents, so it's a little bit interesting here. Here's where I went with the Calgary Stampeders. The quarterback. Oh, the quarterback for Calgary. What do? You have Drew Tate, Kevin Glenn, and Bo Levi Mitchell. At the end of the day, I don't think it's as big a decision as it could have been if the Calgary Stampeders got to and won the Grey Cup with either Kevin Glenn and Drew Tate. But I would Levi Mitchell. You know, he's the youngest guy. He's only 23. Will be 23 in March. 24, sorry. He is currently 23. But that'll leave Kevin Glenn open. You know, if Ottawa's looking for a veteran starter right off the hop, Kevin Glenn is there. Henry Burris is a free agent with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, so they have options if they want to go with the veteran. But in terms of the other 10 import players that I would protect, they would be receiver Marquay McDaniel and Jeff Fuller. How about Jeff Fuller? He had a very nice season with the Calgary Stampeders. Coming out of Texas A&M, had an untimely fumble in the playoff game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but big signs, big things coming for Jeff Fuller with the Calgary Stampeders. Defensive backs, Keon Raymond and Brandon Smith. Defensive line, of course, Charleston Hughes, runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year. How can't you protect him? Linebacker Deron Mayo, the brother of New England Patriots linebacker Deron Mayo. Offensive lineman Stanley Bryant. Defensive lineman Micah Johnson. Receiver Joe West, of course. You can't leave out Nick Lewis as the 10th import player for the Calgary Stampeders. Winnipeg Blue Bombers. This one was interesting too because they have a tremendous amount of talent on that defense for import players. A couple of them are free agents. Joe Johnson and defensive backs for and with the quarterbacks in Winnipeg, and we know the story about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers quarterbacks and how much they struggled this season. Max Hall, Justin Goltz, Jason Boltis for a period of time. Buck Pierce was traded. I protected Max Hall. I think he showed the most promise out of anybody with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I think he would have a chance to become the team's starting quarterback next season if he can do things right in the offseason here. Now, there's a pretty good chance with Mike O'Shea there that they're going to go for Zach Collaros. But if it happens to be Max Hall, I don't think the Winnipeg Blue Bombers would be too far bad. You know, it wouldn't be that far worse than other options anyways. But the other 10 players I protected were Johnny Sears, DeMond Washington, Deja Dunn, all defensive backs, Ian Wild, who was all over the field. You got to watch that guy play. Just look at him for an entire game. Watch some game film on Ian Wild. He's all field, just incredible. Defensive tackle, Zach Anderson. Offensive tackle, Glenn January. Clarence Denmark, the slot back. I have Greg Peach, defensive end. Terrence Edwards, another slot back. And rounding it out was Bryant Turner, the defensive tackle. That leaves a couple guys open. Andre Douglas, for example. another offensive tackle with that Winnipeg Blue Bomber offense. Terrell Parker, who started out so well this season before getting injured, also unprotected in my top 10 there for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The East Division champion Hamilton Tiger Cats. The big decision. Henry Burris is a free agent quarterback. Makes it easy for me to protect Dan Lefevre, the guy I think could make the biggest impact and the guy I would have selected as the starting quarterback for the Ottawa Redblacks if he was there. He's not for me. I'm protecting him if I'm in the Hamilton Tiger Cats. 10 other guys I'd be protecting, and it was tough for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, let me tell you. I left out a couple guys here who even Ottawa's going to be debating between who to take. 10 guys: Rico Murray, Emmanuel Davis, Delvin Breaux, all defensive players. The running back, of course, C.J. Gable. When they use him, we've been on this before. When they use C.J. Gable, he is very productive for that team. The trouble is using him, as we saw in the Grey Cup. Still, a little bit about the way the Hamilton Tiger Cats use their running backs, but, whatever. Defensive line: Eric Norwood and Brandon Boudreau. Got the receivers. I took Greg Ellingson, the outstanding rookie. Lost to C.J. Gable for the nomination for that award, though. And Bakari Grant. And then 2 offensive linemen. We went with Brian Simmons and another rookie, Joel Figua. Had a very nice season for the Tiger Cats, an offensive line that struggled at the outset, but seemed to get it under wraps a little bit throughout the course of the season. We'll move on to their hated rival, the Toronto Argonauts. Zach Laros, again, free agent, so it's a little bit of an easier decision, protecting Ricky Ray. I think Claros could go to Winnipeg with the connection of Mike O'Shea there. The other 10 guys protected are Marcus Ball, the linebacker, a couple of receivers, Jason Barnes and John Childs. Going back to the defense, you have linebacker Green Horton, defensive back Alonzo Lawrence, the feisty defensive tackle Khalif Mitchell, Amy Robinson, Ezra Carter. And the side of the football, running back, Grey Cup MVP of the 100th Grey Cup, Chad Cackert. And league MVP last season, 2012, Chad Owens. And the Montreal Alouettes. Another interesting decision, Anthony Calvillo is there. I don't think he's going to be back personally as the quarterback of the Montreal Alouettes, not because they're going to let him go, but because I think he will retire after the season that he had this year with the injuries and the lingering concussion symptoms. So the quarterback I protected for the Montreal Alouettes, he led them to the playoffs, Smith. And the 10 other guys, running back Tyrell Sutton, cornerback Jeff Tisdale, slot back Jamel Richardson, unfortunately lost for most of this past season due to injury. Also another talented slot back, all-star this season. Defensive end Aaron Laverius, linebacker Chip Cox, the outstanding defensive player of the 2013 CFL season. Defensive back Gerald Brown, defensive end John Bowman, wide receiver Deron Carter, cannot let him go. Got to strat. And rounding out the top 10 for Montreal, I had defensive tackle Zechary, who was also lost for injury for most of the season, but I think he'll make a big impact with that Montreal Alouettes defense going forward. A couple of guys left unprotected there. Moulton Hopkins, defensive tackle. We ought to have him on the show wherever this is. Very well-spoken young man. Brandon Whitaker was supposed to be the big guy in the Montreal Alouettes offense. I had Tyrell Sutton over him. I think at times Sutton, he looked a little bit like he didn't belong in the CFL, but as the season wore on, he had a huge performance in that playoff game against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. But they just couldn't get it done. on offense. So I go with him over Brandon Whitaker, and there's an interesting option if you're the Ottawa Redblacks. To take a running back who's coming off an injury? In that regard. So that's the first round of the Ottawa Redblacks expansion draft. As always, mentioned earlier, feel free to chime in with your input. Guys you would protect. I'm sure there's some disagreement with guys I had and guys that you might have. So please do let us know your thoughts on the Ottawa Redblacks and the expansion draft coming up here. December 16th, bookmark that day. It's going to be huge for the CFL. And of course, free agency 2 months later. But as for this segment of the CFL radio, that's going to do it. Next week will be our final show before the Ottawa Redblacks expansion draft. Maybe we'll have some more, touch on things a little bit more for you. Would be great if you would send us in your feedback, your thoughts on who the Ottawa Redblacks should go after. Should they go after some of these free agents if they're left unprotected? Weston Dressler, Corey Sheets. Would make for some really interesting stuff, I tell you what. Once again, RougeRadio.com. Check it out. All the previous shows on there. Everything that you need to call into our shows. All there. RougeRadio.com, SportsEh.ca. We're going to have the SportsEh guys coming up here in a couple of minutes. Talk CIS. Going over the entire season. Looking over all the teams in the CIS. Telling you what you need to look for. Players that you should be looking at. That kind of thing. They do a great job for us here on Rouge Radio. So be sure to stick around. And that'll do it for me. My name is Tyler Bieber, as always, the host here on the CFL portion of Rouge Radio. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Please check us out next week, the last show before the Ottawa Redblacks expansion draft. Thanks so much for joining me. You have yourself a fantastic evening.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the CIS Football Roundup here on Rouge Radio, presented by SportsEh.ca. My name is James Katsuras. I'm the chief editor at SportsEh, and as always, I'll be your host for this episode. This week, we'll summarize each team in every conference, one by one, how their season went. We'll then give an overview of the entire conference in a few words, what stood out about their season, or its season, and then finally, we'll each give our top 5 list of players in each conference, offensive and defensive, all mixed into one. Joining me on the show, as always, is SportsEh Vice President and former receiver for the McGill Redmen, Zechary Miller, as well as top prospects operations manager and former McGill running back, Niels Takar. Guys, thanks for joining me.
No problem, bud. Good to be here.
Okay, so let's kick off the show by breaking down each team in every conference. We'll start over in the East Coast with the AUS. To kick it off, Zach, I'm going to ask you, we'll start from the bottom teams and we'll move our way up. So how would you sum up St. FX this season?
Well, they went 3-5. Their offense was pretty bad. They got off to a good start, 3-2, and then lost 3 straight. I thought they might have been the surprise team this year. They couldn't pull it off. They had the QB situation wasn't great. Only bright spot for me was Devin Bailey, I think.
Niels?
I'm going to keep mine short and sweet. It was a disappointing season.
So you expected more from them?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Acadia is next. Niels, you start us off.
Well, I'm going to keep it short and sweet again for the second time. Extremely disappointing. Obviously, they won the AUS past couple of years, coming out 3-5. Didn't even make a push. Didn't even play in the finals, the conference finals. Really disappointing.
Yeah, same. They coming off 2 championships. You would expect better. Obviously, they lost some key players, but like Neil said, extremely disappointing. Lost to St. Mary's 3 times. 3. Just you got to win at least once.
Right. Now we're going to move to the 2 more interesting teams in the AUS, Mount Allison Mounties. Zach.
Surprise team this year for sure. I don't think anyone thought they'd win the conference. Botto got off to a slow start, but the Mounties found success after he got going.
It was surprising that they were able to pull off the Loney Bowl. They made that amazing run. They won, 5 straight games when, their situation seemed bleak. So terrific for them. And then finally, the St. Mary's Huskies. Guys, what do you think of them?
They just couldn't pull it off. I think this was the year they could have won it. Their defense played well. Gave up the second least points in the league behind Acadia. But their offense was just terrible, the worst in the league, or in the conference, sorry. So I don't know what to say. It was disappointing. It was their year to win it.
You have to say that the offense really let the defense down because this was, I think, their year to get it done. I picked them over Acadia at least the first game. I don't know if I picked them every time, but ultimately they couldn't get it done. So now we summed up each team individually. Now, guys, just in a few words, how are we going to remember this conference this season? How are we going to remember the AUS in 2013? Niels, you go first.
Well, I guess it was like on the...
It was definitely, I'm going to take over here. It was definitely a slow season. None of the teams showed promise like you think they would. And they're definitely the weakest conference in the CIS once again, which is disappointing to see year in and year out. They need something. They need a boost. I think they need a deep run in the playoffs by one of their teams in the CIS Nationals. And to see a team have success again, that's what they need so they can get recruits in. Other than that, another disappointing year.
The thing is, there's this perception with the AUS. Ultimately, Western got blown out way worse in the Mitchell Bowl against Calgary than Mount Allison did against Laval. And they were the ones who were supposed to be thrown to the lambs. They were supposed to be slaughtered. You know what I mean? And I know they were playing at home, but at the end of the day, the perception was that the AUS was down and their offenses weren't good. It's not like anybody pulled themselves away from the rest of the pack. But, I mean, were they really that bad? I don't know. Obviously, it was a down year. I mean, St. Mary's and Acadia were used to one of either of those teams winning the Loney Bowl, and it was Mount Allison. It was a nice surprise, so that was good. But in terms of the perception this year, I think the conference definitely took a hit, and I think it had a lot to do with the offenses. Having said that, we're going to move on to our top 5 players from the conference. So we'll each give our list of top 5, and we'll see how different they are. So, Niels, you want to give us your top 5?
Yeah. All right, so because it was such a defensive league this year, I'm going to have to go Jubenville, Jesse St. James, Botel, Taylor Renault, and then Tigran.
Is that your order?
That's my order. Top.
So there was a player who was a Heck Crichton nominee, and you put him third on the list?
Yeah, I had to. It was an absolutely defensive. The offense was lackluster, mediocre at best in the AUS. I can't put an offensive player on the top of that conference this year.
Fair enough. Okay, Zach, what's your list?
That's a good point. The offenses were slow this year, but I'm going to have to go with Botel number 1. I liked what Taylor Renault did with a weak squad over there. Then I go Thomas Troop, Tay Nguyen, and Rob Jubenville, who had 9 sacks in 6 games, which is great.
I am shocked, to say the least, that both of you you only put Jubenville, and you put Jubenville ahead of St. James, when St. James was the JP Metris nominee and the first-team All-Canadian. So with that in mind, also the fact that you guys said that offenses were so bad this year, which Jordan Bottle was able to do considering offenses were so bad, I think makes it all that more impressive, his accomplishment, the fact that he was a Heck Crichton nominee. So Jordan Bottle, first for me, easy. Jesse St. James, second for me, easy. Ron O'Mara, guys you guys didn't mention, President's Trophy nominee, fantastic season for St. FX, third for me. Tay Nguyen, fourth, great all-around linebacker. And then finally, although his numbers weren't as spectacular as last year, but that's because he didn't have, a Heck Crichton finalist throwing to him this time, Taylor Renaud.
Back to Bottle, though, being a Heck Crichton nominee, they have to have one nominee out of every conference, right? So he did have a great year, but and it's obviously going to go to an offensive player, so I don't think that's too valid of an argument, James.
Well, the fact that he stood out from everyone else so much, consider he had 200 rushing yards more than Thomas Troop, who was the next closest guy. So I don't know. That's the case for my argument. You make a good point. We can argue it all day, but we'll move on to the next conference. We'll go over to the Canada West. Niels, sum up. Actually, you know what? We'll start off with Zach. Zach, why don't you sum up Alberta's season for me? They finished in last place, 0-8.
I thought they would at least win 2 games this year. The first couple of games, they looked great. They looked okay, actually. They were playing with the other teams. They weren't getting blown out. At the end of the season, they just started getting blown out. by 70 points, losing 50 to nothing. Like, it just was embarrassing at the end of the season. They need to shape up, and they need to find something to bring them back. This is the second 0-8 season.
Just for brevity's sake, I'm going to keep all mine short. Alberta's season was expected.
Regina.
Slightly disappointing.
I would say very disappointing after what they did last year.
I would say overwhelmingly disappointing. They made the Hardy Cup last year, and now they got Cayman Shutter, a Division I quarterback from Hawaii, to go 2-6. I don't think you can call that a slight disappointment, but everyone's entitled to their opinion, I guess. Sorry, UBC.
Good point there, James. Cayman Shutter did come in and was expected to make a bigger impact. Maybe need some more time to adjust to the Canadian game. Excuse me. So UBC, they went 4-4, and they actually had a decent season. They played with all the teams in the conference. They played with Calgary very well in the semifinals. They played a great game, and they have one of the best running backs in the league in Deschamps. So kudos to them. Hopefully they keep improving.
Yeah, it was a good season for them. Not, the best. They could have done better. They could have done worse. I think they sat exactly where they should have in the conference in the end.
They gave Calgary a heck of a run twice, and especially in the playoff loss. So it makes you think if Deschamps played one more game, because he missed one game, and they got one more win, and they didn't have to play Calgary in the first game, would they have gone further in the playoffs? Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan, 5-3, tied with Manitoba. They had a decent season. I thought they would be the team to end up second, but Manitoba pulled it out in the end. So I'd say it's a success for them.
I think disappointing. They were ranked in the top 5, I think, maybe top 10 for sure. They dropped off slowly all season. I thought this was the year they were going to knock off Calgary. Didn't happen.
I unquestionably agree with Niels on this one. Preseason, I was picking Saskatchewan to best Calgary, to knock them off, because Calgary lost their quarterback after the first game. Saskatchewan had a lot of veterans. At the end of the day, I guess we just underestimated how good of a recruiter Blake Mill is and how strong and how talented Calgary's team was, even, considering how young they were. But we haven't gotten to them yet. So next is Manitoba, 5-3.
I thought it was a great season. I thought it could, potentially they could have easily kind of fell down behind UBC. They managed to have a great season where they were in the top 10, I think, nationally ranked by the end. Great season.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. Great season for them. They started off weak on defense, giving up almost like 30-plus points the first 3 games, tying up on defense. And at that point, Coombs was going off. So once their offense starts going, it's hard to beat Manitoba.
To me, Manitoba is the surprise team in Canada West this year. I think everyone was picking, if Calgary was going to give up the throne this year, if people were picking Calgary to finally give it up considering they were so young, people were picking, I think, either Regina because they made the Hardy Cup last year, or Saskatchewan because they had the depth, the veterans. But Manitoba really got a fantastic performance from Jordan Yance. Is anybody expecting 25 touchdowns to lead the country? I don't think so. So to me, that's the surprise team. What about Calgary?
Phenomenal. One word, I'll leave it at that. They lost so many players, came back, went to the Vanier Cup. Phenomenal.
By the end of the season, and I'm going to say throughout the playoffs, I was thoroughly impressed by Calgary. Probably the team that impressed me the most this season, I think, over any team. One of the youngest teams in the league, gave up the least points, scored the most in their conference. They look great for a few more years at least.
Now, I won't say they were the surprise team of the CIS because there's a team in Quebec that I think I would give that to. Maybe not even in their own conference because, like I just said, Manitoba. But I definitely did not pick them to win the conference, let alone go undefeated. So that was a very big surprise by them. Finally, the overview of the Canada West Conference. I will kick it off by saying Calgary owns it. They're the Laval of the Canada West. Is that what this has become now?
It's fair. They have the recruits year in, year out, 8-0. They don't look like they're giving up anytime soon.
Let's not go crazy and call them Laval, but they are becoming the powerhouse of the West. And I think a lot of it has to do with they're getting a lot of players who play junior, and that seems to be flourishing in Calgary versus Edmonton and Vancouver. I think it has a lot to do with it.
You're right. They actually have to win the Vanier Cup before we can call them the Laval of the Canada West.
I think when you said Laval of their conference, was referring to them winning 5 Hardy Cups in a row. 6, sorry. So that's even more impressive. So I could say they're a dominant in their conference in that aspect of winning, but not overall.
Laval has 10, though.
Let's not make this who's Laval or Calgary. Let's just say that Calgary is.
Okay.
Yeah. And now, guys, I'm going to ask you for your top 5 list. I think this one, they're going to be mostly the same, but let's see if there's any differences.
Yeah, I think I have no idea what you guys picked, but it has to be Timis first, Coombs, Deschamps. I'm going with Buckley. He really impressed me throughout the playoffs. Yeah, I'll give it for sure. I think he's deserving. And then Dr. Kasama, rounding up.
I have a slight different pick there, pretty much almost the same though. Mercer Timmins started off. You got Coombs second, Brandon Deschamps third. Then I'm going to go Jordan Yance and then Andrew Buckley. Even though Andrew Buckley managed games very well, I think Jordan Yance is underrated. He had a great season, and no one is really giving enough credit for that. He had a really good season, and I was thoroughly impressed.
Is it possible to throw 25 touchdowns with only 6 interceptions, 309 yards a game, and still be underrated? I think the answer is yes. Jordan Yance, that's as good of a season as I've seen statistically. I mean, he had 4 more touchdowns than anybody else, and he played in a season where 2 quarterbacks broke the record for passing yards. This guy's so underappreciated because he has Anthony Coombs and Nick Dempsey. Rightfully so. I mean, these guys get a lot of the attention, but I had to have him on my list. So with Timis has to be clear-cut number 1, Coombs number 2, Deschamps number 3. To me, it was Yance 4, and honestly, 5 could have gone to a number of guys. It could have gone to an O-lineman. It could have gone to a defensive player. I chose Dembski because, I think he had a fantastic season, but you can't go wrong with that list.
I think the word underrated applies to the whole Canada West Conference this year. I mean, Calgary, underrated coming in. No one picked them. Mercer Timis, underrated. We all thought, hey, maybe he's just, playing out west. No one really knows if it's, he's actually that good. Absolutely is that good. Deschamps, 3rd leading rusher in the country, didn't make All-Canadian. The whole conference is underrated.
Didn't make Conference All-Star, let alone All-Canadian.
Yeah, exactly. So, underrated is the perfect word to sum up the conference.
Very nice. So we have 13 minutes left for the final 2 conferences, guys, so we're just going to have to pick it up just a bit. We'll start off, we'll go to the RCQ next, and we'll start off with the last place, an 0-8 Concordia Stingers. Zach.
Very disappointing. They're just showing that there's a new standard for the worst team in the RCQ. When I was playing back in the day, Concordia was having, they were playing for a chance at the title against Laval, but now they just fell off. Recruiting is terrible. I don't know what to say.
I don't know what to say. I was shocked. I did not think it would be 0-8. They're definitely not that low quality of a team, but then if you go 0-8, how can you say otherwise?
Linebacker, you 0-8, not good. McGill, 3-5.
Horribly disappointing. Obviously, I want them to do better, and I thought this was the year. Well, they made the playoffs last year, but it was kind of by default with some stuff going on there, ineligibility stuff. I thought this was the year they were going to make it truly on their own merit.
And they had some promise at the beginning of the year, didn't they?
They do, and then they had their backup quarterback come in, looked really good, and then, just hurtfully disappointing.
Same, being a McGill. It sucked to see them not make the playoffs. They had a chance. Sherbrooke snuck in there ahead of them. Their defense just needs to get better. It's young. I think their defense just needs to get a little bit better in the secondary, especially. Guimond Mota, look out for him.
Sherbrooke,
I'm going to say he's still disappointing. I thought they were going to challenge Laval this year for that Dunsmore, but, they barely made the playoffs. So I'm going to say disappointing.
I don't think I can be more disappointed than McGill, but in terms of how they should have done, they feel probably more disappointed than I feel about McGill. I thought they were going to, like Zach said, challenge for Laval, at least challenge Montreal. 3-5, barely squeaked in the playoffs. Terribly disappointed.
I'm very surprised. I think they're by far the biggest disappointment in the RCQ. I mean, what Bishop's record was this year, that's what Sherbrooke's should have been. That's what we were expecting. They made the Dunsmore Cup last year, so they were pretty much like Regina. And then Regina went 2-6, right? And then Manitoba was a surprise team. I think it's a clear parallel here in the RCQ. Sherbrooke had Jeremy Rush back. They had Seb Blancard. They had Blanchard. They had they had their weapons, but they didn't get it done. Montreal 5-3.
Montreal, I'm going to say a little bit disappointed because they did lose 3 games in the end. Obviously, Bishop's surprised, but Montreal, they should have had a better season. Their defense was outstanding. Their offense was pretty damn bad.
We've used the word disappointing a lot, so I'm Googling adjectives. Frustrating.
Yeah.
Montreal season was very frustrating. I thought they had it. I thought they could have, really, really made a push. Like we always talk about making a push for Laval. Really done it this year. They held in games, and they just ended up choking. Very frustrating.
Absolutely. I mean, 2 of their losses were to Laval, and then they avenged themselves in the playoffs by blowing out Bishops. at Bishops, right? So they were right there. They were in the Dunsmore Cup again, but we thought it might have been the year they at least knock off Laval again in the regular season. Almost did, but couldn't quite get it done. Bishops, I think this is an easy one, 6-2.
Yeah, like you said before, surprise team. Amazing season. Hats off to them. They had a great season.
If Sherbrooke is the biggest surprise, like in a negative way, then Bishops is the exact opposite. Unbelievable season, small school, Jordan Heather, Alexander Fox killed it.
What more can you say about that? Pretty much sums it up. So then finally Laval 8-0. Is anyone surprised in that? How do you describe that season?
Not surprising at all. I think the right word is expected.
Yep, Laval is expected. And same thing about the conference. It kind of ended up as expected other than Bishops. That was the one kind of mix-up this year.
Yeah, I guess business as usual for Laval. It's gotten to that point with them. I guess, do you guys want to say anything else about the conference, or that pretty much sums it up?
That's about it. Yeah.
It's the Laval conference at this point. And then Bishops was like the nice story of the season. It was, I guess we'll remember it for two things. For Laval and for Bishops. Yeah. That's it.
I'm going to remember for Sherbrooke too. If they don't bounce back next year, this could be some sort of Concordia turning point where they just can't get their stuff together. They lose recruits. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but it might. We'll see.
Very good point. Okay, top 5 list. I'll kick it off this time. I'm going to blow everyone's mind here and say number 1 was Jordan Heather.
Oh my God.
I know you guys are going to protest that. Number 2 for me was Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. Got to go with that. The guy's a rock in the middle. For me, Alex Fox was number 3. Antoine Pruneau, President's Trophy nominee, was number 4. And Laval offensive lineman, multiple first-team All-Canadian, Pierre Lavertu, paved the way for that ground game.
I think for me, just the top player is Jordan Heather, obviously. The rest aren't really in order, but I'm going to give Alex Fox some credit. Guy Mota, I think he had a great season, the best running back in the queue. Vincent Deloge, I'm including the playoffs here because he really impressed in the playoffs, and I'm taking that into consideration. And then Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, obviously.
I've got no McGill on my list, therefore I'm not biased. Jordan Heather, number 1. Pascal Lachard, number 2. In the 3-4 spot, can go either way. Pruneau and Deloge, defensive, like rock horses there. I don't know if rock horses is a real word.
It is now.
Okay. And Alexander Fox rounding up the top 5. Incredible year, only 1,000-yard receiver. Him and Jordan Heather made a great pair.
So Heather and Fox are the mainstays in our list. We have 7 minutes left, and we have one more conference, the OUA. We'll start off at the bottom. Niels, sum up Carleton's winless season for me.
Again, I don't want to use the word expected again, but that was expected. They did actually better than I thought they would. Coming in as a new team like that, you can easily get completely destroyed. They hung in some games, but they were going to go 0-8 from the start.
Yeah, like you said, expected, but I'd like to see them crack 100 points on offense. I think to take away, they actually gave up less points than Waterloo. Good job.
I think you can't judge anything based on. I think next season will be the first, barrier or barometer, I should say. But an expansion team, you should expect that. Waterloo 1-7. Very
disappointing. I don't understand how they're so bad. Honestly, that's it.
I didn't know much about the OUA coming in. I thought Waterloo was a mediocre team. I saw them play Laurier. They got handed to them. I don't want to say too much negative stuff, but they don't look to me like they can really compete in OUA.
They're a long ways away from the glory days of the late 90s when they had some big-time success. Went into this season a lot of promise, didn't get it done. Laurier 1-7.
Huge disappointment. I thought they were going to be I thought they were going to be on par with Windsor.
I think they're the best 1-7 team that I've ever seen. They actually played decent football. I won't say great, decent football. Lost a lot of close games. I think they'll do a lot better next year with a little experience under their belt.
To me, they're not a disappointment at all. I think with a new coach, youngest team, you saw how in the second half of the season, they were the only team that's ever held a lead against Western going into the half this season, and they should have beat Queens too. They lost the end. So I thought they were fantastic.
Right, but they ended up 1-7. So that's what I mean. They had that potential. They were there, but they could not capitalize on it. I guess that's the angle I'm coming from.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're as good as your record. So you're right. York 2-6.
Disappointing. I thought they were going to be better. Miles Gibbons came in, did pretty well. Errol Brooks did well. I thought they were going to crack out 3-4 wins.
Yeah, I think they should have done a little bit better, especially being 2 wins behind their crosstown rivals, Toronto. Toronto, decent season, 4-4, but they didn't make the playoffs, so it's going to have to be a disappointment.
Exactly what I expected. I don't think they're a playoff team. They didn't make it, but they had a good season. Looked good to me.
To me, very big surprise. Huge strides for them. First 4-win season since 1993 when they won the Vanier. First 4-win team to not make the playoffs, so I think they got screwed, and I think they're building the foundation for a solid team for years to come. Windsor, 4-4.
I thought I didn't really know anything about Windsor going in. They impressed me on the whole. I thought they did pretty well.
I had Windsor as a top 5 team in the OUA. They didn't end up cracking that. They still had a decent season. Defense was great, but their offense needs some shaping up.
Windsor disappointed me. I thought they'd have at least as good of a record as Ottawa did. They didn't. So Ottawa, 5-3.
Surprised me a bit. They had a veteran team, though. So if you look at it that way, it's kind of expected for them to do a little bit better this year.
Great comeback season. They started off pretty poorly, came back, a lot of injuries, ended up with a winning record and in the playoffs.
McMaster, 5-3.
A lot of people would say disappointing, but with Quinlan gone, I thought that was completely expected. I actually thought they were going to have a much poorer season.
Yeah, kind of what I expected. They're still a top 4 team, but not as good as they were, obviously.
Their 3 losses, those teams' record had a combined record of 22-1. So, 22-2. So Guelph, 7-1.
Guelph is what I expected. They said they were going to go 8-0. I didn't really believe it. I thought Queens was a better team, and they proved it.
Overrated. I don't think that 7-1 record reflects how good they were at all.
I completely agree with you because their schedule is easy. However, the fact that they've been able to do 2 seasons in a row now, I think that's huge for Guelph. I think big strides for that program. Looks really good for them. Queens, 7-1.
Just short, I guess that's the word I would use to describe. Everything they did this season came up just short.
For me, a big disappointment. I had big expectations for them at the start of the season. Veteran team thought they were going to actually take the A's Cup this year, and they fell, I think, a decent amount short because they didn't come close to beating Western. Surprised me how much they dominated the OUA. Over 100 points more than the next closest team. They just were on offensive and defensive juggernaut.
I don't know if this word really works, but screeching halt is what their season came to when they faced Calgary. They absolutely destroyed the regular season. I thought they were phenomenal. I thought they were going to do better, but it came to a screeching halt with the Calgary Dinos.
Guys, overview of the OUA. How are we going to remember this conference this season?
Offensive-minded, but I guess you can say that every year, and slightly, if not vastly, overrated.
Yeah, the one word I could think of right now is overrated because of that huge loss Western took to Calgary. I think they're behind now the RSEQ and Calgary as top conferences. They're probably the 3rd conference in CIS now.
Sadly, I agree. I think that loss is going to define their season, considering how great it was, and it's going to open the door for haters to say, oh, the OUA is not good as we think they are. They're overrated. Guys, top 5 players from the OUA.
Well, this one was a little harder, a lot more players, but I'm going to have Will Finch number 1, obviously. I'm going to go with one of his favorite targets, Brian Marshall, and then leading OUA rusher Dylan Campbell, surprise pick Jan Dikabel Token, 5 picks, and then Paul Kruba. Paul Kruba before Jan Dika. There's no order there, sorry.
Very surprising pick, but I like the ingenuity. I have to go Will Finch, Paul Kruba, the 2 arguably top players on defense and offense in the country. George Johnson, I saw him play a couple times. I thought he was phenomenal. Great athlete out there. Ettore Latanzio did very well on defense. Have to give him credit. James loves the guy. And Dylan Campbell. I'm very impressed by Dylan Campbell this year. He's my number 5.
Well, Finch has to be number 1. Ettore Latanzio has to be number 2, and I think he has a chance to break the single-season sack record next year. Pavel Kruba, President's Trophy winner, has to be number 3. Paul DePass from U of T, number 4. Great. I mean, Neil's rolling his eyes for days over here, but considering the team he had around him, the season that he had, I think it was phenomenal. And then finally, Brendan Galanders of Ottawa, a team that went 2-6. The next year goes 5-3. I know Coleman should get a lot of the credit, but so should the veteran running back.
You graduated from U of T, right? Yeah, that's a little homerism right there, I got to say.
Well, at least I got pride for my school, unlike you who didn't pick Duvernay-Tardif or Gomolta for a top player from RSEQ, which blows my mind. But anyways, unfortunately, that's all the time we have here on your weekly CIS football roundup on Rouge Radio. Make sure to check out SportsEh.ca for the latest commentary on CIS football and CIS basketball, as well as high school football and basketball. And be sure to check out RougeRadio.com for our latest episodes and CFL talk. We'll be back next week for more CIS football discussion. I've been your host, James Katsuras, joined by Zach Miller and Neil Stakar. See you guys next time. Thank you.